Welcome to the Tudor Dixon podcast. I have a special guest today. He is the Deputy Director of the National Council of Resistance of Iran, the author of The Iran Threat, and an outspoken Middle Eastern expert working to prevent the Iranian regime from acquiring nuclear weapons. It's really key right now because we've just found out that they are potentially producing more nuclear potential weapons in Iran than we've ever seen before. And so we wanted to get right into this. I have Alireza Jafarzadeh with me. Again, he is the Deputy Director of the National Council of the Resistance of Iran. Alireza, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much, Tudor. It's always a pleasure to be on your show.
Well, I enjoy having you as well. We are looking at all the stuff that I feels like news is coming fast and furious out of Iran, what's actually happening, what's happening with the United States. I know the president has been working with them on a new nuclear deal. However, this information that's come out over the weekend is pretty stunning. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. The IAEA puts out every few months they put out a report about the nuclear weapons or nuclear program of Iran in general, but specifically on the nuclear weapons program. This report that hasn't actually been published, but has been available to the Board of Governors of the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is the UN nuclear watchdog, but also it has been viewed by some journalists who have written stories about it. Based on that, this report is very damning because on so many different aspects, the report makes it very clear that A, when it comes to producing fissile material, which is a necessary core for the building a nuclear bomb, the regime has actually enriched uranium to 60%, and they have also increase the amount of enriched uranium to 60%, about 50% higher and more quantity than they had in February. So that means they have enough fissile material once they further enrich it to 90%, which is just a screwdriver's turn away. They would have enough fissile material for about 10 nuclear bombs.
And when you say nuclear bombs, are we talking like the type of nuclear bomb that we've seen dropped on Japan in World War II?
Well, this is we were talking about the implosion bomb, yes, and that implosion bomb is something that the Iran regime has been working on. They had an original plan known as Ahmad Plan, from early 2000s. And that Ahmad Plan was to give Iran 5 nuclear bombs. And they were working on that very secretly until we first exposed the nuclear site in Natanz in August of 2002, right here in Washington. And that triggered the same day the reaction by the International Atomic Energy Agency, which, by the way, until then, they had no inspections program about Iran. They had never gone to Iran to inspect sites and all that. So that triggered the inspections, and eventually the Iran regime allowed the IAEA to go to Iran in February of 2003. And then the whole cycle of inspections started. Now, that Ahmad Plan basically was disrupted primarily as a result of our revelations. I'll give you one example. There was one site in addition to Natanz known as Lavizan Shian site near Tehran that we exposed in May of 2003. The IAEA got very interested about that site. They wanted to inspect the site, and they went back and forth. Eventually, the regime allowed them to go to Lavizan Shian in June of 2004. That's 13 months later. And what they found was nothing. The regime had entirely razed the whole building, the whole infrastructure. They had removed the soil, and they changed everything. And they told the IAEA, okay, now if you want to take samples, you can come and take samples. They were 100% sure that they have removed everything. And the IAEA, which was absolutely shocked by that, they took samples. And that's where they found traces of highly enriched uranium. That became one of the main centers of contention between the IAEA and the Iranian regime. Now, the new report...
So wait, when was that?
That was in June of 2004. We're talking about 21 years ago.
And since then, we've been watching, but they've never really formally found Iran to be in non-compliance, right? They've been watching, but this is the first time that the Western powers are submitting a draft resolution saying that they are truly in non-compliance right now.
Yes, definitely, because one of the reasons that they didn't, they were hoping that the Iranian regime will have, would clear some of those questions, what they call possible military dimensions, meaning work on building the bomb. And the regime basically continuously and consistently rebuffed the IAEA. And one of those points was about this site in Lavizanjian. The IAEA basically said, you know what? We're not going to pursue this anymore because we're not going to get anywhere. That doesn't mean that we're satisfied that this issue is resolved. That means that we're just putting it aside, clearly showing that the Iran regime is not planning and has not planned to respond to any of these inquiries. It's practically useless to go back and forth with the Iranian regime because they're just going to play games with you. They give you explanations that even a child would not accept it. But as far as they're concerned, that's their response. And
well, it seems like
this report is important.
It seems like they have zero respect, obviously, for anyone outside of Iran, and they certainly have little respect for the United States. And we've seen what they did on October 7th of last year of 23, I guess it was, in Israel. What is now we are hearing from Iran, of course, we're not ever going to use these weapons. This is for peace. But knowing that they were able to enact such a horrific attack on Israel and such a surprise attack, obviously something that had been in the works for a while, but obviously we also know that Biden released all that money to them. They ended up in a very wealthy situation where obviously they use that money for terror. Other countries would use it to feed their people. That's not how Iran works. They use it for terror. What are the dangers to the United States or even the European countries if they continue to build toward nuclear weapons?
Well, think about it, Tudor, that without the bomb, they're the world's leading state sponsor of terror. Just about every trouble in the region, one way or the other, traces back to Tehran. The Iran regime has significantly benefited from relying on these proxies that they built over the years. Look at Hezbollah in Lebanon. The whole creation and the continuation and the funding and the training and the arming of Hezbollah entirely came from Tehran. And this was conceded by Hezbollah leaders, including Hassan Nasrallah. The same situation with the Houthis in Yemen, that they were basically formed, funded, and trained by the Iran regime to wage attacks the way we saw it, at least in the past year or two. The Shia militias in Lebanon, and you mentioned the case of October 7th. That attack could not have possibly happened without the direct involvement, training, planning, funding, all of those things, either directly or through their other proxies like Hezbollah and others. And that's why, we said right from the beginning that the head of the stake of war and terror lies in Tehran, and so does the solution. So long as the mullahs are in power, you're going to see all of these activities continued. But the only good point you can find among all of these things is that the regime is getting increasingly weaker and weaker. They're losing these proxies. Look at Syria. Assad was the biggest ally the Iran regime had, for years, for decades. They spent at least $50 billion to prop up Assad, spending as many as 100,000 of their proxies to keep Assad in power. And then in 11 days, the whole thing collapsed. And the same situation with Hezbollah and other proxies. So the people have now seen the weakness of the Iran regime, that the mullahs are not 10 feet tall, the way they wanted to portray themselves, but also inside Iran. This corroborates with what has been happening inside the country, that the regime, has been facing a lot of rejection by the Iranian people. We had, several rounds of major uprisings in Iran in all 31 provinces, people calling for change. And that's where the real asset is.
And we've seen quite a bit of that. We've seen even the women who have gone out and protested with refusing to wear the hijab. And then, we've seen some horrific reactions from the mullahs there and the way they've treated the people. We've also seen people rise up against the regime and just be executed. I mean, this is a really, the way they treat the rest of the world through their proxies is how they treat their own people as well. We shouldn't be deceived by the fact that they're going out to fight other people. They would behead and murder their own people just like they would do to anyone else. I mean, it's a very brutal regime. But I think there's a couple of things I want to cover here. When people talk about them as the world's leading sponsor of terror, as you mentioned, these groups would not exist without the support of Iran. The Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, all of these, they're getting funding from Iran. Now, I think it's critical to mention that Donald Trump came out and said, had he been president, the attack on Israel would not have happened. And people don't really understand, if they aren't really very involved in this discussion, they may not fully understand what he means by that. And I want to break that down a little bit, because Donald Trump was very clear about holding money from Iran. He wasn't going to give them the billions of dollars. He was going to hold back their oil production and their ability to sell oil. He did that effectively for the 4 years that he was in office. Joe Biden reversed all of that. Obama had also gone the completely opposite direction. How much does who is in power in the United States matter to the safety on the world stage? Because under Obama, it seemed like the Iranian regime became much more powerful. Trump came, there was a reduction in power. Biden, all of a sudden, we're seeing sponsors, these terror attacks being sponsored by Iran again because they have all this money. How much does the United States impact the ability for the regime to continue to launch their terror attacks across the world?
Well, Tudor, it's extremely important how the outside world treats the Iranian regime and this situation in Iran. Unfortunately, for decades, the biggest problem has been the policy of appeasement that was pursued by the West, both by the Europeans, but also here you mentioned examples during the Obama administration, during the Biden administration. The whole idea behind that was that, okay, there are some moderates within the Iranian regime. If we just be able to reach out to them, empower them, giving them money and incentives, then that will change the behavior of the Iranian regime. At least that's the justification they use. To the contrary, the mullahs this is a system built on theocracy. The supreme leader has all the authority. The vote of people doesn't even exist. So the more money and resources you give them, the more empowered they get. And that's why the money that goes to Iran under any pretext, it will end up in the pocket of the Revolutionary Guards and the supreme leader. Not even a single dollar of that goes to the people or helping the economy or flourishing the society. None of that. And that's why you saw that, Tehran wanted pallets of cash. Why would you ask for pallets of cash? I mean, real cash. I mean, real money that you deliver to them. Where does that end up? In Lebanon, in Syria, the leaders of these proxies said very clearly that when they went to Tehran, they were given like suitcases full of cash, so much that they couldn't even carry anymore, the tens of millions of dollars of cash given to them. This is not the way you want to treat the Iranian regime if you want to end the terror and, the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism. So it does make a huge difference how the policy is pursued, whether it's the United States or in Europe. The oil revenue, for instance, doesn't go to the people. In fact, when the oil export of Iran, which was close to 300,000 barrels a day in January 2020. In about 4 years, it went up to close to 2 million barrels a day. Now, do you think that would help the Iranian economy? It didn't. The currency value of Iran went down way, about half of that. The inflation has been higher. The people of Iran have gotten poorer. But at the same time, the regime had more money to give to these proxies to expand their nuclear weapons program, to expand their missile program. The regime has spent $2 trillion on its nuclear weapons program. Think about it. $2 trillion is a lot of money for Iran. The whole Iran-Iraq war that lasted for 8 years cost Iran $1 trillion. And yet the nuclear program has cost them $2 trillion. So that's why you don't want to give money and resources to a regime that has a history of using that for terrorism and against their own people, but also to the detriment of the people in the region.
Stick around. We've got more coming up on the Iranian resistance movement. But first, I want to talk to you about my partners at American Alternative. Markets are still experiencing that volatility. Remember, we talked about those brief rallies, then they're being erased by sharp sell-offs. And the dollar continues to weaken on international markets, but gold has surged to all-time record highs. Wall Street analysts are warning of persistent market stress, and they're advising their biggest clients to seek safety now. So we know when markets swing this violently, your retirement savings are vulnerable, and it's during these uncertain times that people need stable assets. For thousands of years, that asset has been gold, and that's why I'm proud to endorse American Alternative Assets. They take a different approach to precious metals. They get to know you, they get to know your family and your needs, and they know that precious metals protection isn't for everyone, and that's why they only work with people they know they can help. They provide quarterly check-ins to ensure your strategy stays on track, and 30% of their customers return and refer friends and family. American Alternative Assets is offering our listeners a free wealth protection guide and up to 5% bonus on your first purchase. So call 877-522-GOLD or visit tudorsgold.com right now. Don't wait until it's too late. Protect your wealth and secure your future today. That's 877-522-GOLD or visit tudorsgold.com. Now stay tuned. We've got more after this. Well, and obviously we know what the result is of nuclear weapons. I think that's why this should be a top concern. I mean, we're talking about the top threats to the United States, and I think everybody would say the top threats to the United States right now are Iran and China. Iran is really a wild card because if you just look at what the supreme leader is posting on social media, you would say, okay, this is a massive threat. This guy is regularly saying that he wants to take out the United States of America. And this hasn't really been, it seems like under the Biden regime, you're right, that they were looking at this and saying, oh, there's some reasonable people over there. And I think most generals that work under the Trump administration would say there is no reasoning with these people, that this is a radical regime. And to your point, they've been funding these terror attacks in other countries, but they're preparing something that to me is very scary. In fact, they're so manipulative. And I think this is what the American people need to understand, because there has been some back and forth over whether or not they're as dangerous as we think they are. There has been in July, I think it was July of 2024, the director of national intelligence here in the United States said that she had credible evidence that Iran was funding the protests on college campuses and the Palestinian protests. And that message was, oh, these people are living under the control of Israel. These poor people are being treated horribly by the Israelis. That message was going far and wide across the United States. But tell us a little bit about exactly how the people of Iran are treated by the mullahs.
Well, let me just add one point you mentioned, and I'll talk to you about the way people of Iran are treated. You mentioned the website of the Supreme Leader Khamenei. Just a few months ago, the website of Khamenei posted a video clip of, they had made. It was a simulation of the assassination of President Trump at the golf course and all of that, and how they actually monitored the whole thing and went and supposedly carried out that assassination. You would think this is just a propaganda thing where, from a few months ago. As we speak right now, that video clip is still on the website of the Supreme Leader. What does it tell you? That's the agenda that the mullahs have. They're spreading terror, violence, and instability. That's how they survive. They thrive on that. And the same treatment they give to the people of Iran. Since last year in August, when the new president of the regime, Pezeshkian, the so-called moderate, took office, nearly 1,300 prisoners have been executed, including women and including political prisoners. That's a sign of a very vulnerable regime that stays in power only through repression and killings. That's a sign of a regime that has been rejected by the people of Iran. And that's why these protests that has been going on in the past few years are extremely important, because it shows you how the people of Iran feel about the regime, number one. Second, they're willing to take the risk to come to the street and confront the regime, to wage protests in a public way. They were chanting, "Death to Khamenei, death to the oppressor," be it the Supreme Leader or the Shah, making very clear that they reject any form of dictatorship, the same way that they overthrew the Shah's dictatorship, which was repressive, had the secret police sabak, had a single party rule, was extremely corrupt. They got rid of him the same way they're willing to pay the price even higher to get rid of the mullahs. But also what is important is the sentiment of the people is combined with an organized resistance, because the regime can suppress protests here and there and find a way to survive. But when there is an organized opposition that has a plan to confront the regime, that is willing to pay the price, but also has a plan for the future, plan for the transition after the overthrow of the mullahs. But what kind of Iran they're looking for? Interestingly, you talk about the repression of women. It's not an accident that the leader of the opposition and those who are in the forefront of the fight against this regime are actually female women. Because this regime is so misogynist, the opposition, in direct contradiction to the mullahs, they have a lot of respect for women. In fact, women leadership. Mrs. Mariam Rajavi has been the leader of this movement. She introduced a plan known as the 10-point platform for the future of Iran, that calls for, ballot box as the sole criteria for legitimacy, separation of religion and state, gender equality, freedom of religion, free market economy, peace in the Middle East, and a non-nuclear republic form of a government. That platform and her movement has been gaining a lot of support internationally, both in Europe, some 4,000 parliamentarians, sitting parliamentarians, cross-party, but also here in the U.S., there was a resolution that was just introduced a few months ago here and just passed the 225 co-sponsors, which is a majority bipartisan, that supports that 10-point plan, but also talks about those young people in Iran, what they call the resistance units, their right to confront the Revolutionary Guard, their right to overthrow the repressive rulers. That's where we need to focus. We need to, instead of thinking about the mullahs, whether we can have a dialogue with this mullah and that mullah, think about the people of Iran who are eventually, at the end of the day, are going to be able to bring about change and be the real partner with the international community. We need to stand on their side, stand on the side of their, those young people, to bring down the mullahs.
Before we get into that, I do want to go into exactly what that plan would be, how that would look, because I think there is a lot of fear over how does one get in and overthrow such a regime. the way they were able to get into power is how any communist gets into power, is to deceive the people. They had great propaganda. They still have great propaganda worldwide, but I don't think their people are deceived anymore. I think the people know exactly where they stand with the mullahs. However, I think it's just an interesting contrast here as we watch the people in the United States, so many of these young college students who have come out and defended Hamas and defended this type of brutal regime. And I don't think they realize exactly what they are defending. They're defending this, and we have this one gentleman, I don't know if you've heard this story, but one gentleman who came onto a college campus, he is being deported because they say, he didn't have the right to go onto the college campus and defend and create anti-Semitism, defend this terrorist regime over there and to defend Hamas. And the people in the United States are just up in arms. How could he be deported? This is such a disaster. I think of the contrast of the people of Iran who go out, as you said, knowing the consequences, not hundreds, but over more than 1,000 political opponents of the regime have been executed. This is not like being deported. This is not being jailed for the night. This is not being let out on bond. This is losing your life to try to bring back freedom to your country, a country that was once very free. I mean, if you look at videos and pictures of Iran just 25, 30 years ago, it's a much different country than it is today. I guess we'd be talking, maybe 60 years ago now, that Iran was a much freer country than it is today. How do you get back there? How do you overthrow this regime? And would it be to go back to what Iran looked like in the 70s?
Well, definitely, as you said, Theodore, we have a history of over a decade at least in the contemporary era of fighting for freedom and democracy. We once had a nationalistically elected government of Dr. Mossadegh. Too bad it was overthrown by foreign powers, but also with the help of the clerics at the time who put the notorious Shah back in power, who would rule through sheer repression. Then people revolted against that. And then the mullahs came out of nowhere. Interestingly, the mullahs had no role in the revolution. If the revolution was a genuine revolution for freedom, people wanted to have freedom for everybody, every sector of the society. But the good point is that the people who are sacrificed their lives over the years, they know exactly what they want. It's very clear. Let me show you. You mentioned the price has been paid. This is a book in front of me. You can see how thick it is. It contains the names of 20,000 and their pictures of those who've been executed under the mullah since 1981. This book actually was published in 2006. There are more volumes after that. I just brought that as an example. It has all the details, names, particulars, age, education, and many, many pictures here of young people who were killed, many of them students, high school students, university students, many of my own friends in high school. Actually, their pictures are here. And when you have a generation of people who stood up and sacrificed their lives, they all have family members, they all have relatives. Just in summer of 1988, the regime, under the fatwa of the supreme leader at the time, Khomeini, went after the main core of the opposition, known as the Mujahideen Khalq, or MEK. Khomeini, in a fatwa, a religious decree said that anyone who is in any way associated with the MEK must be killed. The only people they could catch at the time were prisoners, political prisoners, none of whom were actually sentenced to death before. So Khomeini issued that fatwa. They formed what they call Death Commission. They interviewed every single political prisoner in Iran at the time. They asked them just one question: what's your position about the MEK? And if they had said anything favorable or remain loyal to them, they would send them down the hallway and execute them right there.
Ugh.
30,000 political prisoners were killed at the time. This was all done silent in a secret way. Of course, later on, all of that was exposed, and the world has talked about it. The UN did a thorough investigation, called it a crime against humanity and genocide. But the goal for Khomeini was to eliminate all of that. So that would end any kind of opposition to the mullahs, to the country. You saw the young generation in the streets of Iran who are one way or the other related to those who were massacred in the 80s, in 88, in the 90s by the mullahs, the younger generation, those who heard the stories of them. You know, these people who gave their lives, they created a culture for resisting oppression, for sacrificing for freedom, real freedom, when people would have their voice heard, real, genuine freedom in a, you know, against a theocracy, a repression like the mullahs or the Shah's dictatorship. That's why I feel very, very hopeful. When you have genuine people, when you have organized opposition built based on those people who've sacrificed knowingly, knowing where they're going, and then you have a platform, you have women in the leadership who came out of the, you know, in opposition to the misogyny of the mullahs, who have remained very committed. That's a tremendous sign and indication that the future is so bright. And that's why I feel very strongly that not only the mullahs will be overthrown, but Mrs. Rajavi has committed to a peaceful transition, saying that, you know, we're not fighting to just get ourselves in power. Absolutely not. She said, my goal and our movement goal is to transfer power to the elected representatives of the people of Iran. In her platform, she says that within 6 months after the fall of the mullahs, there's going to be free and fair elections leading to the formation of a national constituent assembly, which will be representatives of the people. And it is that assembly that will determine the future course of the government, what kind of government should be formed, you know, all of the things happening. So that's why, you know, I think this is the time that if the world focuses on the solution, not just on the problem, realizing that there is a solution for Iran, and that's the people of Iran, the organized resistance. And Tudor, think about it for a moment, that a free Iran, a democratic Iran, what a difference it will make in the whole region, and if not the rest of the world, how Iran will become a source of peace and tranquility and, you know, and cooperation and tolerance with the rest of the world, rather than being the epicenter of war and terror.
Absolutely. That could change. I mean, that would change the safety of the Middle East and the entire world. It would be a huge difference. And we will keep following this, because we know that you and the NCRI are working very hard to make sure that we do see a free and peaceful Iran at some point. Alireza Jafarzadeh, thank you so much for coming out today.
Thank you so much, Tudor, for the great job you're doing to inform the American public about the realities on the ground, that there is a solution and there are ways to tackle the problem. Always a pleasure to be on your show.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And thank you all for tuning in to the Tudor Dixon podcast. For this episode and others, go to TudorDixonPodcast.com. You can subscribe right there, or the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. And remember, you can check out the full video on Rumble at Tudor Dixon. Join us next time. Have a blessed day.